Hey everyone, Anel here. I have a bit of an interesting and long video today that's a bit of a prelude and resource I wanted to create before finally releasing a revised blade ranking / tier list type thing I've been working on for quite a bit. So in this video, I have tested some DPS calculations for every rare blade currently released in the game, the results of which I will showcase in this video. Now a few disclaimers before you ask how a certain blade did or did not perform so well. I will briefly discuss each blade during their section and what can contribute to them doing better or worse. Some blades, such as T-elos, did not have access to any of their skill tree additives, so they may have performed worse than they possibly could have. I will make sure to make note of this. All of these tests were done on challenge mode Ken with minimum HP and minimum attack in order to try to get as consistent of an enemy as possible. He has 12.5 million HP, 30 physical and ether defense, and a fair amount of agility. Keep in mind that even for this, forms of variance will exist. Maybe in one run I get toppled and can't chain attack out of it more than another and lose a few seconds. Maybe I got a lot of really lucky crits with one blade. By default, Earth and Wind blades get a natural advantage and Ice and Electric blades get a natural disadvantage just because of Ken's typing. These are things to keep in mind that I will make note of. Outside of typing, I'd say that for every minute of time, you can add plus or minus 5 seconds of variance to the time. For this showcase, Rex uses Knuckles, Twin Rings, and his unique weapons. Morag uses katanas, hammers, and lances, and Zeke uses bitballs, cannons, and axes. Nia uses nothing because she's just not really that great of a driver. Sorry, Nia fans. For these fights, I use Solo Driver with 2 inactive blades for their modifiers and Hunter's Chemistry. For my Aux Cores, I use Affinity Max Attack, Night Vision, and Outdoor Attack depending on number of Aux Cores for the blade. Everyone at least has night vision except for Mythra, Shulk, and Praxis because of their accuracy buffs on their skill trees. Shulk additionally has Aquatic Hunter. I use medals on everyone unless otherwise stated, and I swap between Crimson Headband and Noise Dampener depending on how high the crit rate of the current blade is. Abyss Mask is also used on almost everyone. Double art recharge pouch items as well except on Mythra and Fiora because of their strong critical recharge effects. I use 1 book on Mythra and 2 on Fiora. Any other changes I'll make note of in the video for the certain blade. This list won't be a perfect representation of DPS, but the goal is to make a useful resource that comes close. Obviously, some blades can perform better than others against different enemy elemental typings or in certain scenarios. So I'm obviously not going to show the full fights for all of these, but maybe the last 30 seconds to a minute of each except for maybe the last few. I'll also show how blades can change or become drastically better with support at the end of the video. Time is counted when the last hit that kills Ken appears. So starting off, we have Electra, who has by far the worst DPS in the entire game. She's the only blade I just gave up for. Ken's electric type along with Shield Hammer having the lowest DPS weapon type made this almost impossible to complete. I lost access to night vision because it lasted more than 12 minutes, and her level 3 special is insanely long, making it very difficult to even put any kind of decent damage out. Having only 1 Aux Core means that I have even less damage, and there's just really nothing about Electra's DPS that's going to be useful for anything in the game. Definitely the worst. Like I said, I lost access to night vision, and Ken's electric type even cuts her DPS even further. I couldn't even finish this fight. So next we have Finch, who's another Shield Hammer, and I also lose night vision towards the end of this one, but I'm a lot closer, so it's not as big of a deal. Finch is Wind type, meaning she gets a little bit of bonus damage for 40% of the fight, and she also gets a chance of getting her arts or specials back, 20% chance, which makes her have a slightly more DPS, but she still only has 1 Aux Core, meaning she's pretty hard to have consistent fight with. So I finally do end up getting the kill here, even despite losing night vision. She's still pretty far into the second worst. Next up we have Godfrey, who's continuing the trend of Shield Hammers having terrible DPS. Despite that, he ends up doing a lot better because of Challenger on his skill tree and having 2 Aux Core slots. He does get hurt a little bit by being Ice type, so he loses damage towards the start of the fight. That's not really a big deal. He definitely does a lot better than Electra and Finch do. He's still hurt by the low crit chance of the Shield Hammer, and the weapon in general just having terrible animations and ability to do DPS, but besides that, he does end up faring a lot better. Next we have Dromarch, who's part of a pretty weak weapon class, unfortunately. Twin Ring also shares the lowest crit rate in the game and has very low auto attack. The ratios on the arts aren't super good as well. I do use Rex here because he does have a pretty good Twin Ring set where he can cancel pretty well with 5 arts in a row, and they have pretty fast animation, so it's pretty useful. Overall, Dromarch has nothing that really helps him have any damage though, so he's pretty low on the list. So the lowest attack blade on this list is actually Perun. Now, she doesn't have access to any of her abilities that give her a lot of damage, like low HP allies, and Ken is also Ice type for half the fight, so she's pretty low because of that, but even still, 1 Ox Core, no additives really, a bad special 3 effect and animation, and she just ends up being a really bad character outside of her niche effects. Probably the worst attack blade in the entire game, easily. There's nothing really redeeming about the character, unfortunately, because in my opinion it's really bad to have dead allies or low HP allies anyway. So despite being a Poppi form with a lot of customization, Poppi Alpha just does not have really good DPS. I modify her to be Earth type so she does a little bit better here. But even then, really long art animations and really bad ratios with Shield Hammer just makes her not super good here. I do have to use Spike Defense here just because of the low crit rate and the fact that all of the arts are multi-hit, meaning I would get hit by a lot of Spike if I didn't. So that's one of my Aux Core slots. I do use the other 2 for damage boosting though. Overall, she could be a lot better. So now we get to Boreas, who's the lowest Bitball on this list. Bitballs have the lowest auto attack in the game, and Boreas only has 1 Aux Core slot, making it really hard to do a lot of damage with him. Luckily, Bitballs have some pretty good animations with Zeke, and because of Shell Shot always healing me when I use it, I don't have to run a medal on the accessories, which allows me to get a little bit of extra damage here. And in addition, Ken is Wind or Ice type for part of the fight, so I get a little bit of bonus damage at the start because Boreas is Wind. But outside of that, Boreas doesn't really have a lot of positive things going for him, but he can still say he isn't last. So now we have Ursula, who's the lowest ranked Knuckle on this list. She's Ice type, so she loses a bit of damage at the start, and she also only has 1 Aux Core, making her damage a little less than stellar. But she still has a pretty good Knuckle set on Rex. Feral Uppercut's a really nice art that does a lot of damage when it crits. So despite having a pretty slow level 3 special animation and being Ice type with only 1 Aux Core, she still does a decent amount of damage because of Knuckle's high crit rate and Rex's good set with it. And she beats some blades like Perun you would never expect her to beat too. So now we have Perceval, who's the first blade on this list that can definitely be better. He has 300% additive on his skill tree that gives him more damage the more enemies you kill, and you only need to kill 2. So in multi-enemy fights or in the wave formats of other challenge mode missions he'll get this ability, and he will have more DPS than other katanas for sure, and maybe more than any other tank. But in this format he only has 1 Aux Core slot, so his damage is really lacking because of that. His special 2 and 3 are also pretty slow, which I use a lot. Overall he could be better here. Azami is a blade that doesn't really benefit from this type of DPS format. Her damage mostly comes from chain attacks at low HP, so having a format like this where you focus on art damage a lot and not special damage at low HP doesn't really favor her in the least. So this is not her strength, and it really clearly shows here because she's by far the worst Ether Cannon because of it, and has really low DPS. In general, being low HP is bad outside of certain chain attack builds, making her a really bad choice for Bringer of Chaos in general. Dahlia continues the trend of Bitballs not being super great DPS weapon types. It doesn't help that she's Ice type and she loses a little bit of damage at the start, but she does have an Aux Core slot and some crit damage and chain attacks, making her decently powerful here and giving her a little bit of extra DPS over Boreas. But overall, she's still not going to be the greatest or the fastest in this department. Again, I don't use a medal here because you don't need to with Bitball because of Shell Shot. I was a bit surprised at Obrona being this low, but it kind of makes sense in hindsight. She doesn't really have a lot of damage and can enrages to electric type, making her damage cut even further. Fast auto attack animations doesn't really help her that much. And the ratios on her arts aren't really that impressive either. And she doesn't have any good effects on her specials, and only 2 aux cores means her damage isn't that great. Blade Nia doesn't really have anything going for her in terms of damage outside of 3 aux core slots and some 2 high ratio arts. Outside of that, she's pretty much focused for pure healing and doesn't really have a lot of damage here. She has some decent animations at least, and you do not have to run a medal on her because of her severe amount of healing, so you do get a little bit of extra there, but that doesn't really help her do a lot of DPS still. Overall, she's a healer first, not really damage oriented. Kora is an electric knuckle, which means she has damage cut at the end of this fight, but having 2 aux cores and the access to feral uppercut makes her pretty powerful, and her level 3 special is pretty good. So she ends up doing quite a bit better than Electra here, but still worse than the other knuckles just because of her electric typing. She could potentially match the other knuckles in a more even elemental environment. So now we have Kasandra, who's definitely the best of the original shield hammers. She has crit heal on her skill tree and an additive on her skill tree as well, making her pretty strong because you don't have to run a medal, and you also get an extra 50% damage. 2 aux core slots also gives her a little bit of additional damage. And in addition, her level 2 special is really strong. It gives 100% extra damage to enemies targeting you, and it's really fast, making her quite a bit better than the other 3 shield hammers that we've seen so far. She's still in the lower half of damage, but if you want to use a shield hammer and you don't have the DLC, she's definitely going to be your best option here. Or if you just like Shulk, since Shulk just outclasses Buster in every way. Cassandra is also cute, so she has that going for her. So despite being electric typing having her damage cut at the end of this fight, Vess does have a lot of extra crit rate over other bit balls, making her decently powerful, and she also has a pretty good level 3, and also has 2 aux core slots, giving her some decent damage with affinity max attack. As usual, we do not have to run a medal because of Shell Shot, so that helps her a little bit too. So here's the first of the Torna Blades, Cressidus. Wild Slugger replaces Feral Uppercut and has a decent effect on it, so we try to use that as much as possible. He's also Earth type, so he gets a little bit of bonus damage at the end. But overall, he's still kind of outclassed by the other Torna Blades. He doesn't really have a lot of damage or ratios on his on his arts or specials, and only 2 aux core slots. So overall, he's not going to be the best DPS here. So now we have Floren, who's probably only the highest bitball on this list because of Ken's Earth weakness for the second half of the fight. 2 aux cores, a decent level 3 helps also. But Vess would probably beat him in most practical scenarios. She doesn't hit as hard because he has electric typing, and Floren gets basically a huge bonus with his Earth typing instead, so he ends up being a lot better here just for that specific scenario. Floren is the highest of the non-DLC bitballs as well. So now we have Rock, and for reasons unknown to me is this low, a bottom 20 character in DPS, despite having things that shouldn't make him bottom 20, like his 60% crit rate. I don't know why he's this low, I don't understand why he's this bad myself. But he's got 2 aux core slots. I guess he doesn't get access to his back attack additive in a fight like this, nor really ever. Back attack kind of sucks, because if whoever you're playing or controlling is probably going to have aggro a lot. And his other additive, Swift Strike, only works for the first 30 seconds of a fight, so that's not really that useful either. Overall, Rock really sucks outside of his quick smash art, so pretty bad character to use, even with the wind typing. So now we have Newt, who's a slightly better katana than Perceval without his additives. She has 2 aux core slots, a high 50% crit rate, good animations with Morag, and good damage because of it. She also gets a little bit of a bonus in this fight from having break resist, or reaction resist anyway, so she doesn't have as many things to worry about here, as far as Ken's auto attacks, cutting her like animations or something. Mega Explosion's also pretty good, decent level 3 special. So overall, she ends up doing okay for a tank blade here, 31st, I believe. Continuing with the katana trend, we now have Aegeon, who I honestly didn't expect to be this high. But it does make a bit of sense. Katana's just a pretty good weapon type for DPS, actually. And he's got 2 aux core slots, and his special level 3 effect gives bonus damage to enemies targeting him. So this allows him to actually do pretty decent here, along with Crimson Headband and all the other effects that increase damage for him. So, despite seeming weak, he's actually pretty strong. Nim is an Earth Knuckle, meaning she gets bonus damage the second half of the fight, and she also has access to Feral Uppercut, a high crit rate, and 2 aux core slots, making her pretty good in this department. Definitely one of the higher end damage dealers for the Knuckles. Her fusion combo up makes her worth using even outside of this, however. Uppercut does over 200,000 damage when it crits, which is pretty powerful. Gorg is the first axe on the list, and with a big emphasis on defense rather than offense for an offensive blade with his damage reduction and things like that, it would make sense that he's this low. Regardless of that, he still has some decent damage potential with Take on Chip and on Zeke, so he's middle of the pack blade still for DPS. Being an axe allows for infinite arc cancel too. Sheba is an interesting case, because she definitely has potential to be a lot higher. The problem is on challenge mode, she cannot get any of her gold additive up to 333%, because her level 3 does not drop gold in challenge mode. So that's 333% damage she just does not get access to at all, which hurts her a lot. And in addition, in a party format, she'll have more females, which means she'll do more damage there, so this doesn't really benefit her to be solo driver. In addition, this could be the one blade that's better on Nia than Zeke, just because Nia's a female. I'm not exactly sure on that. I probably should have tested that as well, so keep that in mind also. Her level 2 is pretty good though, and I try to use that effect as much as possible to increase her damage some. So that's what I end up doing to do as much damage as possible here. She's much stronger outside of challenge mode. And just missing the top half of the list, we have Poppi QT. I do end up using Spike Defense on her as well, just because of Scattershot would be killing me if I didn't crit at all, which can be pretty annoying. I have Crit Heal on her as well, so I don't have to run that as an accessory though. She's ranked 26, which means, just like I said, she just missed the top half of the list. And despite being a Poppi form, she doesn't exactly have the greatest DPS output, even with some pretty interesting arts and cooldowns that allow her to cancel without having to worry about getting deflected. Overall, still decent, but definitely outclassed by QTpi. So the 2 blades tied for 24th are actually only a second faster than QT, which is kind of unfortunate for QT. So first up we have Theory. So Theory's actually interesting because she gets her damage cut the first half of the fight because she's Ice type, but despite that she still does a lot because she has Break Resist, allowing her not to worry about getting destroyed by Ken's auto attacks, and her level 3 has crit damage effect on it, and katanas have like a 50% crit rate, so she ends up doing quite a bit of damage with this. It's pretty fast, and with all the other benefits of a katana, she ends up being the fastest katana here that we have released anyway. So her damage is pretty good, and it shows here. The other blade tied for 24th is another blade that has potential to be a lot higher, but is kind of not super good in this format, just because Ken, she doesn't really have time to stack up Judgment against Ken very efficiently. And the wave formats of other challenge mode missions are against other enemies that have a lot of attacks you can dodge quickly, like Ophion or Tyrannid Titan. You end up charging up Warpire a lot faster and get to your higher damage a lot quicker. Against Ken, he doesn't use many attacks at a high frequency, so you don't end up dodging a lot of attacks to get your Warpire stacked up super fast. Because of that, the DPS output of Brighid is not as high as it could be in this particular format here. But overall, she still performs decent and gets more damage as the fight continues because of Warpire. I use Assault Stone on Perdido to focus on his auto attack and special damage more than his art damage, and I also don't have any cooldown reduction pouch items. I have special damage instead, so he's a little bit different in that respect. So focusing on his strengths, he ends up doing pretty well on this list, and finishing with a decent time that puts him at 23rd on the list. So the jump between 22nd and 23rd is about 40 seconds, which is pretty ridiculous. For Poppi Buster, I do try to focus on using level 4s as much as possible here, and she ends up being the fastest shield hammer just because of that, having 100% additive on her skill tree and having 3 aux core slots. Definitely ends up being quite a bit better than the other the other shield hammers. It easily makes the top half of the list and almost top 20 because of it. She's still more defense-oriented, but the faster animations and cooldowns and other things, well, faster animations and speed really helps her out quite a bit compared to other shield hammers too. So Sever ends up being pretty strong for this because of his defense and guard null effect, meaning he doesn't have to worry about Ken's defense or his guard rate. And he's also wind type, so that helps him get additional damage in the first half of the fight. But because of his other effects, he can just pretty much infinitely cancel and not have to worry about much of anything here, and that helps him out quite a bit. He also has plus 50 strength on his ship, which makes you do a little bit of additional damage there. Overall, he's pretty strong for this. Moving into the top 20, we finally get to our second Lance, which is Praxis, which shows just how bad Perun is. So Praxis only has one Aux Core slot, but it really doesn't matter too much, because she gets a 60% additive above 90% HP, which you usually are, and she gets a 100% additive at max affinity. In addition, her other ability is 50% accuracy at max affinity, which means you don't have to worry about any accuracy or night vision on your skill tree, or your other Aux Core slot, allowing her to run something else there. So Akos is another interesting case. The higher the enemy's defense is, the higher his DPS output is going to be because of transmigration. What this does is flip defense values, so for Ken's 30 defense, it flips it to negative 30. So Akos' main problem with DPS in this is that, again, Ken enrages to electric type, otherwise he could even be a little bit higher, and also the fact that his arc cooldowns are a lot higher than Axe arcs. But on the upside, he has an AoE party heal on Standing Ovation, so you don't have to run a metal either. So his DPS actually ends up being pretty good, and even higher than Gorg because of this. Pretty solid character for DPS, but he gets weaker the worse an enemy's defense is. Agate has the great axe weapon type, as well as some pretty good blade arts and an additive on her skill tree that gives her some extra damage. And being earth type allows her to do some bonus damage the second half of the fight. But because of being an axe and all of the bonus crit and all that other stuff, it allows her to do pretty good here. 2 Aux Core slots mean she's not going to hurt quite as much as some other axes, but she still does a pretty great job of being pretty effective for this kind of fight. So next up we have a 3-way tie for 15th of blades that all finished at 406. First up is Veil. So for Veil I try to use 6 level 1 specials as fast as possible in order to get her 300%. And after doing that, she has quite a bit of damage that helps her out quite a bit here. The Lance high crit rate, as well as some other effects, like Dark being a pretty good element, helps her put out some decent damage in a pretty fast time period. Being top 15 in damage output is pretty good, and this is where the blades start to get pretty powerful and finish in pretty good amount of time. Still not the best Lance, even after stacking up her abilities, though, in my opinion. So next up we have Mikhail, who I was really surprised did this well, but after thinking about it a bit some, it does make a little bit of sense. So he's got 3 Aux Core slots, which helps him get a lot of extra damage there. He has a great effect on his level 3 special to enemies targeting him. And he has front attack up on his highest ratio art, which is very spammable, open fan, so we try to use that as much as possible. And in addition, Rex has a pretty good animation-wise twin ring set that allows him to cancel 5 arts infinitely into each other, so it does make a little bit of sense there as well. Overall, I was still pretty surprised a tank character with no additives and a kind of low crit rate did this well for DPS, so I have a pretty high opinion of him now. So I think he's a pretty good character to use in a lot of situations. So next up we have Pyra, who's top 15 and living up to her Aegis moniker somewhat from being top 15. She's got crit damage on her skill tree, crit damage effect on her level 3, and blade combo boost as well on her skill tree, making her level 3 hurt quite a bit, which is the main thing we want to spam here, spamming this blade combo and doing as much damage as we can. Her lower crit rate, unfortunately 39% at max affinity, means she can't take huge advantage of a lot of these, so I try to showcase at the end just how much better she can be with some support like Fiora and Dagas helping her out. But overall, she ends up being decently good character, not as good as her other forms, but still pretty powerful, and I guess worthy of being part of the Aegis. So now we have Adenine, who is definitely higher than she should be. Battle Wisdom makes her do a lot of additional damage the first half of the fight because of her wind typing, making her hit for more than double damage in the first half. She gets to the second half of the fight really quickly because of it. But Rex's Knuckle Set's really good, Feral Uppercut's really good still, so she ends up doing a lot of additional damage anyway, and being pretty useful. Her damage should not be underestimated even without Elemental Wind, so... In 13th, we finally get to Shulk, who's definitely built more as a kind of support character than a pure damage dealer with his abilities affecting the entire party. But even regardless of that, he does have a very high auto attack and crit damage on his skill chip. And his light combos really hurt as well, so he ends up being pretty powerful and pretty useful even still. Increased art speed and animations over Shield Hammer also helps him a lot, and he pretty much outclasses Poppi Buster in every way. Guard and no level 3 also helps. I believe it also pierces. Dahlia is an axe with 3 aux cores and 120% additive on his skill tree, making him pretty powerful on Zeke because of Tachyon Chip doing crit damage and all of that. In addition, his ability is also party-wide also, so that's one of the reasons it's probably not quite as powerful in a solo format, but Dahlia is still a very powerful character in his own right. He has crit damage level 2, which I try to spam a lot until level 3 combos. Just missing the top 10, we have Herald. So Herald has 200% additive on her skill tree, and 3 aux core slots, allowing her to do a lot of damage on Zeke. But regardless of that, she still isn't really in her strength without her level 1 and special and chain attacks. Her level 3 is kind of slow, and it does physical damage too, making her not the best DPS cannon. And taking additional damage is also kind of bad. Regardless, she's still a really good blade, but mostly in chain attack setup builds. She's kind of bad outside of that and in challenge mode, or Bringer Chaos mode especially, but still good. So despite being in the top 10, T-elos is a blade with a lot of potential to be higher. She doesn't have access to any of her 800% additive on her skill tree from 300% killing enemies and 500% from dead drivers. But regardless of that, having dead drivers kind of sucks anyway. But Dark's a great type, and her increased special damage helps her out a lot. She also has defense and null, making her do a lot of damage, even regardless, because she just completely goes through defense. And overall, it's enough to get her into the top 10. 3 aux core slots also gives her additional damage as well. Strong character with potential to be higher. That's what T-elos is. And now we get to Cressidus, who's actually a top 10 blade despite the inherent weaknesses of a bitball. Her 500% additive with potions helps her a lot, and I try to collect 5 potions as fast as possible in this fight. Zeke's really fast bitball arts combined with this 500% additive pushing her way ahead of other bitballs just makes her really a force to be reckoned with for sure. And she ends up outdoing her hero Pyra because of it. The extra damage is really impressive, and she's a really strong blade. Definitely makes the other bitballs look really weak in comparison. Great blade to use in fusion combos and chain attacks as well. Definitely a good blade. So now we get to Wulfric, who's the strongest lance without meeting any additional requirements. He's got a really powerful level 4 that I try to spam here with crit damage effect on it that helps Stone and Gaia Crash pretty much always damage cap. And the second half of the fight, he also gets bonus damage from Ken being ground weak. He's got crit damage and affinity max attack on his skill tree, and he also doesn't get access to the Preternatural in this kind of fight where enemies take bonus damage if they're toppled and launched from him. But even besides that, he has a lot of damage. He's got really good arts on Morag, pretty fast effect and good effects, and it ends up helping quite a bit. Wulfric is a strong blade that's definitely worthy of the top 10, and probably one of the best early game blades you can have, out-damaging pretty much every other blade you get in the early game. Patroka is interesting in that she can be higher, but she could also be lower. So Patroka doesn't have access really to her 150% additive from being lower than 30% HP because we're not set up for that. And she also doesn't get access to her 300% additive from killing enemies, which helps her quite a bit. But regardless of that, she does have bonus elemental damage the second half of this fight, which helps her just absolutely destroy Ken. She does more than double damage, and she has 3 Aux Core slots, which helps her quite a bit, and she really just destroys Ken the second half of this fight. In addition, her weapon is a Lance clone, but it's a really good Lance clone, having crit damage, 40% crit rate, and a higher auto attack than Lance with Perun chip. She absolutely wrecks Ken the second half of this fight after he enrages, and if she had other additives, she can do similar damage at pretty much all times if she had access to her 300%, I would say. And she also has an evasion art that allows her to not have to worry a ton about a lot of other effects as well. Overall, she's a really strong blade and probably top 10 in most scenarios just because of all of her abilities combining. So next we have Mythra, who I'm actually kind of shocked myself ended up in this spot. She ended up 6th place, and a lot of that is probably due to her crit recharge, allowing her to start at special level 1.5 and allowing her to spam Lightning Buster by spamming her really fast arts. So basically the entire strategy is just to spam Lightning Buster, Gamma Rays, and Supernovas as much as possible, and I use a book instead of an additional art recharge pouch item, which increases that damage even further. In addition, I don't have to run Night Vision on her because of her Foresight ability, and every Gamma Ray and Supernova hurts quite a bit, and she can easily get it back really quickly every time. Believe it or not, without the Supernova animation, she would actually be top 5 instead of just outside of the top 5. Lightning Buster is very fast, hurts a lot, it pierces, and it always crits because of its plus 50% crit modifier, along with Mythra's 58% crit at max affinity. Overall, I'd say I underestimated her DPS myself, and she's a really strong blade. Definitely worthy of being the Aegis. So now we get to KOS-MOS, who has Defense Annul, a 100% additive on her skill tree, and 3 Aux Core slots, and very, very good special damage with that one ability that allows it to be doubled, essentially. Because of that, we essentially try to spam level 3 as much as we can, because it's a really good ability with crit damage modifier as well. And she ends up easily out-damaging Herald and other Ether Cannons because of that, and she's just a really strong blade, really good effects, and she's just really versatile in like every aspect as well. Definitely a strong blade worthy of being in the 5th place position. So coming in at 4th place, we have Zenobia. So she gets some bonus damage the first half of the fight, but that's not a huge issue. She's got 180% additive on her skill tree and a really powerful level 3 special that gives her an additional 100% damage to higher level enemies, and it also has a critical modifier. This makes Cyclone and Wind pretty much always damage capped, which is really nice to have. She's also got 3 Aux Core slots to increase her damage even further, and all of that combined, along with Zeke Axe having Tachyon chip bonus and crit damage bonus and all of that, ends up making her a really powerful DPS blade, and in the right formats, she can easily outdamage pretty much most other blades. But surprisingly, she's not even the highest DPS Wind blade, but we'll get to that. So this is where Ken's electric weakness actually kind of makes a big difference in the possible time. So because Zeke's eye only lasts for 90 seconds and Ken is electric in rage, making Pandoria do 80% of the damage she normally does, I can't quite kill him within the duration of eye, and because of that I lose like 30 seconds just to that. If not for the electric in rage, you might be able to... Pandoria might have been the fastest even without support, but I do show off Pandoria with support at the end of this video. So as we know, Eye has a lot of DPS, but without Eye, Pandoria is very mediocre and probably would not be very good here at all. 3 Aux Core slots would help a lot, but no additives on the skill tree or anything like that would hurt her definitely. Because of Eye just doubling all damage flat, any support helps Eye more than anything else, so I show that at the end. Without an Electric or Rage, she'd be a lot closer to top 2. In 2nd place, to the surprise of probably no one, we have Fiora. On Fiora, I don't even run any art recharge pouch items because Screw Edge is just that good of an ability. You stack up your crit additive really quickly with Screw Edge, you get to spam a bunch of really powerful specials with her, and all in all, her DPS is just really powerful. She does get a little bit of bonus from Ken being Wind weak the first half of the fight though, as usual. But even besides that, the DPS Fiora has is pretty immense, and I still can't believe she's considered a healing blade, but you know, whatever. Screw Edge is about all you really need here, and her special damage, you don't really need anything else. 500 ratio art with crit recharge, hits 4 times, that's pretty ridiculous. Her level 3 special is really strong too, and that's where the additional bit of our damage comes from. I don't know if level 4 here was actually better than level 3 or not, but level 4s usually have really high ratios, so I wanted to go for it here. All in all, Fiora is really powerful, and the gap between 2 and 3 is really severe. And who else would be number 1 here except for Poppi QTpi? She's got 6 Aux Core slots, she's got some really good abilities, she's got an insane customization option, she can have crit damage as an effect on her skill modifications. You don't have to run a metal on Tora, you can replace that with like a saber attachment or something. And you can change your element to earth to do additional damage here. You can change it to any element for any enemy also. There should be absolutely nothing surprising about this. She doesn't need support as much as other characters would either, so it's really easy to do a lot of damage really fast with her. Her break art's also insanely good, and max customization, it's pretty clear she's probably the best blade in the entire game, because you don't have to really do anything to make her good besides just put some stuff on her from Tiger or buying things with ether crystals. Her built-in skill set is really powerful, and just having a bunch of additives by herself makes her really viable in pretty much every situation. So the last thing I did want to show off here is how some characters can get a lot better with support. So Pyra, for example, with her crit damage effects, can get a lot better if you have someone like Fiora supporting her to get extra crit damage. Her level 3s are going to hurt more, she'll get higher damage over time effects, and she'll be able to just do a lot with burnout and regular fire as well. This can effectively cut her time in half just by having support. I also use Dagas for an additional 120% additive. Overall, this effect can help a lot of people, but having Fiora as support helps people with lower crit rate more than people with higher crit rate, and especially people with crit damage effects like Pyra and Wolford. A character like QTpi, who can hit elemental weaknesses really hard, can take a lot of benefit from having Adenine and Petroka as support. Once Ken enrages here, you just pretty much end him in like 10 seconds. Pandoria arguably benefits more from support than any other character, since all of her damage is doubled flatly. Having a character like Fiora to raise her mediocre 20% crit rate, and having a character like Dagas to add an additional 120% additive can have a major effect on her damage. The effectiveness of support is essentially doubled because of that, and she gets a massive boost from having any type of support helping her, and arguably the highest single target DPS in the game when she has this kind of support. So the moral of the story is, when you're using Eye of Shining Justice, make sure you've got some support characters like Fiora and Dagas. Even with Electric and Rage, we still just go through his health bar extremely fast, even despite having 80% damage, compared to what we were doing before. Well, I think that about covers it. I hope you've learned something useful. I certainly learned a lot myself when making it. As already said, this isn't a perfectly accurate measure because some blades can be better or worse depending on affinity chart requirements and elemental typings, but it should give a general idea on where blades stand. I hope you will all look forward to the big Blade Rankings project me and some other members of the community have been working on. If you enjoyed this content and want to see more like it, or just any additional challenges I try to do on this game as well as guides and anything else, then feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll try to release more quality content for this game as well as Golden Country in the future, so please look forward to that. With all that said, I hope you all have a wonderful and blessed day.